Welcome to Scream Therapy. I'm your host, Jason Schreurs. In October of 2018, I found myself in the hospital, sitting across from a psychiatrist who was telling me I had bipolar. I was sent home with a bunch of medication and laid on the couch for a week. I had my iTunes library on shuffle, trying to shake the hornet's nest from my head. Ever since I was a kid, I've been using loud music as a form of therapy. Punk rock and mental health have always been connected. This podcast looks at that connection through the lens of different guests. This is Scream Therapy. Ever think about how many punks work in mental health and substance use support services? A coincidence? I think not. Sarinn Blawatt of Vancouver, BC punk band Alien Boys has worked in harm reduction for more than 15 years. Health and social services, such as harm reduction, are about opening doors to a place where conversations can happen and connections can be made. Sarinn talks about the culture of care they learned within the punk scene and how it translates to the work they do today. Things like lack of housing, access to education and services, food security, and classism are gauges to how well we are doing as a society. Alien Boys center empathy and resistance in their songs. By its very nature, punk rock is an extension of that culture of care.
Hey, I am Sarinn Blawatt. I am the singer for Alien Boys. I like to think that I became a person in a small town in the interior of BC. I've been living in Vancouver for about 15 years now. There's a lot to get into over the course of how mental health and more specifically substance use has been part of my story. And it's a really nice dovetail, I think, in a way with punk rock. I mean, we all come from places of expression and trying to find the spaces that we fit. For me, punk rock and maybe a little bit more to the side of industrial and heavy metal as well became this safe space for me when I was younger for finding that sort of social identity of belonging when you maybe don't feel like you fit into the structures that are around you. Punk really gave me the language to become more politically active, which became a really big piece of who I am and who I try to continue to be, not just for my community and those around me, but certainly for those who are close to me, my family, my kid, my friends, all of those folks that I carry with me in my heart. One of the things that I like to think of is punk rock and metal kind of gave me this introduction into working within communities for folks who maybe don't have as much access to capital. And I say capital in like a very Marxist influence kind of way, where it's just we're talking about resources, whether that's money, whether that's access to education, all of those little pieces of privilege. I was really grateful that my old partner and I used to support and put on shows. One of the nice side effects of that is that we would get bands coming through, staying at our house all the time. And so a lot of our friends were kind of working in this capacity of harm reduction in the downtown east side. And I had some really great late night conversations about how it was for them. Everybody is touched in some way by mental health or by folks who have used substances, whether that's personally or otherwise. I think it's really hard to find a person who can't relate in some capacity like that. And that's where the power lies for me in shaping this sort of community building and this net that we try to have for those that we love that are touched by those things in their own worlds and depending on where they're at in their journeys. how we can really act as that sort of supportive net for them so that nobody has to do that ridiculous thing where they say, oh, everyone has to hit bottom, which I totally don't believe in whatsoever, before you can struggle your way to the top.
It's amazing how many folks who are punks or involved with care work, healthcare work, you look around in that community and it's like, okay, that person's, oh yeah, they're from that punk band and they used to put on shows. Why do you think that is? I mean, you touched on it, but what is it about that?
I think that a lot of it can get boiled down to really thinking about how our social identities fit into that context. So, especially for punks or folks who are part of that anti-society society, where, you have your standard and your norms under capitalism as they exist and all the things that we're supposed to be. And then the group of folks who are swimming upstream against that and trying to create their own spaces. There's that kind of like notion of it being outside of that context. And so this idea of helping not just folks who are, brushing up against these kinds of things in a mental health capacity or substance use way, but this like alternative legacy that exists. I mean, a lot of our idols, and heroes for me, I mean, thinking about Nirvana and Velvet Underground and Dead Kennedys. And like, there's so many songs that are specifically about substances and substance use and that kind of becoming part of that narrative of being that outsider. But then seeing that play out, not trying to say that it's fashionable or cool in any way, but it just kind of became very intrinsically tied in with that oppositional or more defiant space that I think a lot of punk rock and maybe even heavy metal, etc., exist. That counterculture thing.
In bands like, I'm thinking Ramones, I mean, they had songs that were very outspoken about mental health, maybe in their way, like kind of that Ramones satirical way. It wasn't just about, like you said, not glorifying it or making it seem cool, but very much addressing that issue. And even, with Kurt Cobain, obviously he was entrenched in that and he was writing songs that were almost felt like a cry for help in some cases. But, like addressing this issue of substance use and how it does connect to mental health. It's a pretty punk concept that is like way ahead of its time. It's kind of almost common knowledge now that the two things are connected,
Yeah,
obvious. But back then it was like not so much.
completely. Yeah. And I think that that really comes with just how we've been, like, as a society now, talking about and learning about how substance use is, or mental health is like biopsychosocial trifecta that
Hmm.
kind of has to take into account all of these things. Like, it's not just one, it's not just the other, but it's how do these things really fit together to create this mosaic of the experience of these things in our life today. It's funny too, because I think a lot of punk rock, ironically or unironically, I didn't even necessarily know it at the time, but I'm thinking about like with the Dead Kennedys, like Drug Me.
Drag me, drag me, drag me, drag me. I'm trying not to say we're getting where we're going through. They make my time go by. TV and the serum, girls watch what I want. I can never really got to see that movie
There's a line where it's I relate better loaded. And I used to be like, yeah, man, like 100%, I definitely relate better loaded. But then how that's shifted for me and maybe thinking about how that was more satirical at the time for Jello of talking about like, why do we all have to be in this particular state? Why do we think that we have to be consuming things at like an obscene rate and getting wasted at punk shows and going to these things when like maybe the motivation for our support for each other and for our communities could be better if we're not always drunk all the time or something.
Yeah.
Funny watching that relationship change and certainly my relationship with substances, even going from my teens into my 20s into my mid to late 30s. It's definitely changed.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of going to a show and having that person that's just really been either overserved or just binge drinking. And obviously we're taking care of them, but how do we work in harm reduction just in that sense? The harm reduction work that people like you do is a whole other level. But just how do you deal with someone at a show that's acting like that? It's kind of a microcosm for the rest of society. And maybe the way we deal with it is a punk rock way. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that that really speaks to the culture of care that exists within punk rock communities. One of our music videos, Bender, there's most of it takes place in the bathroom at a place that was an amazing DIY collective space that held shows for many, many years. There's a scene where, folks are definitely behaving in an overserved kind of way and puking into the toilet and trying to recreate who's going to be caring for who in these scenarios, but also those kinds of things that happen and that like accountability to everyone in your community if someone is behaving in a way that's not okay at a show, if they're shoving people around or trying to hold space for folks who should be closer to the front, who want to be closer to the front, who maybe don't always get to because it's such a privileged and sometimes aggressive, predominantly male space. I think that that's something that we try to really to do as well. So it's just finding ways that we can sing or yell or play music to, for, and about those folks who have been historically pushed to the margins. So like what we would call priority populations in the work that I do.
Let's get into the sad stuff. It's hard not to dwell on it, and maybe you can touch on what the downtown east side is. I had a friend that went down there for a show recently, and he's like, I don't think I can go to shows in Vancouver anymore. It's too sad. It's scary. So maybe just try to give listeners an idea of what is going on down there.
Yeah, I mean, it's always tricky because there's a really complicated dynamic that's happening, especially in places like the downtown east side, where there are significantly more services that are available for folks in this way, but maybe not services that are always doing it the best way. We know that the things that are being offered, whether that's like treatment or whether that's other forms of recovery or harm reduction initiatives, like it takes all kinds to push forward and to be able to bring people into that circle of care. So when we're really being hard or refusing to engage with alternative forms of care because they're maybe not as politically welcome or politically attractive, we see that political will really influences the kinds of care that get delivered, period. The opioid poisoning, not even a crisis, just the ongoing opioid poisoning experience for people who are using drugs, not in the downtown east side, but of course everywhere in Canada and North America, has really increased significantly. There were so many alternative forms of harm reduction or safer alternatives that may have been presented as an opportunity that could have brought people in before things became as intensely bad as they are now when fentanyl hit the scene. But that really wasn't there. We're always looking for that kind of quick fix. What's the band-aid that's going to cover up the mess right now? And in doing that, we don't ever really get enough data. We don't get enough of a timeline to see that significant and impactful change happen. And instead, it just is this kind of continuous system of disruption over and over and over again. Fentanyl is a different demon than heroin was. It does things differently to people physiologically. And with the kinds of benzodiazepines that are now tainting the supply and making it really dangerous, we have all these really cool initiatives that are oftentimes really peer-led. So like people who have that lived and living expertise of illicit substance use, who are leading those efforts, not just with harm reduction, but like folks who are collaborating with drug testing, for example. No one tool is going to fix everything. So we need a really expanded toolkit.
Hmm.
But the problems change as time goes on. And at the end of the day, as people see things, I think more and more it becomes more publicly visible. That's really just a telltale symptom of how the current systems that are in place are failing the people who need the help the most, or who at least need access to things that should be considered human rights the most, like housing, for example, which
Yeah.
we see getting harder and harder to find, especially in Vancouver, but I think everywhere in BC and certainly even being recreated across Canada, just because of speculative markets and it's totally unaffordable. It's so
Hmm.
much harder to be able to get those things. Or like food, income, access to services, things like counseling. Like these are all things that we know and have been identified as being critical ingredients for people's wellness, whatever that looks like to them.
Yeah.
And as well as giving them the agency to be able to choose which things are going to work best for them. I mean, that's how we welcome people into really starting that journey.
We live in a small town, and so a lot of people who have empathy and hearts are very concerned for the at-risk population here, whether substance use or unhoused people. But, you have people who are just like, first of all, they want to know why. They want that question answered, and they want to know the best way to get away from that, what they call a problem. How would you explain to someone like that, the layperson's kind of explanation of the why of it?
Yeah, right. I think that this is really an indicator of how well we're doing as a civil society. And for folks who do find it challenging, maybe to translate that empathy and that compassion for folks who are in a particular situation, if we're talking about folks who are experiencing houselessness or who are using substances, none of this stems from one thing. This is a complicated explosion of this lack of access to capital, first and foremost. It's like, how are we supporting families? What kinds of education pathways are we offering to folks? What kinds of supports are we starting with right from the very beginning? One of the things that I hear a lot about is like, for folks who do fall on hard times, how is anybody supposed to live off of $400 to $1,000 a month, depending if they're on basic welfare or if they're on disability of some sort? And then what is that going to do for them? Especially in the context of today's economy, not being able to support people first as a society is where everything starts to fall apart. And if we're saying that we don't believe, some folks do, looking in a judgmental capacity at people who are in some of these situations, that if we don't believe that they deserve help, then who are we? And like, we need to really look at ourselves, because if you're saying that there's one group of people who are less deserving than others, what does that mean for how you view the rest of the world?
You've been working in this area for 15 years or more.
Yeah.
How has that been on your mental health?
I mean, it's been tough. One of the things that we talk about a lot within this work is this aspect of burnout and how it can be really hard because you're in it, you're in the trauma every day. You're right in it when people are having immense crises that you can't just fix just with a snap of your finger. That it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of support and a lot of access to resources to be able to bring folks alongside. And those opportunities, when they come together, it's a beautiful thing, but a lot of times it's a struggle because there's just not enough to go around. For me, I mean, my journey working frontline was for about 12, 13 years. And I was hitting a point where it was becoming harder for me to be in that space, to go home, to be able to unpack. It was just carried with me all the time. You become so close, you make all these really beautiful relationships with people, your coworkers, your colleagues, all of these legends who are people who have lived experience as well, who have created these immensely, profoundly impactful programs within Vancouver, who have all, in some way or another, you know, I stopped being able to count people who had passed away that were of close relation to me, not just in the context of my own life history, but in the context of the work that I do, that
Hmm.
I couldn't function anymore in a way. The sorrow was just so big. But this is a place that means so much to me. And I had heard so many people's stories over the years and really just sat with people and shared space and held space for them that it felt like it would be unfair to walk away. I feel so passionate about this and being able to support people to talk about the things that they themselves want in an ownership kind of capacity that I decided to pivot. So for me, the journey for my own mental health and coming back to this work was to really find a way where I could bring stories with me to the top, where things could be impactful for change. So holding space and sharing space with people who have that experience by doing a PhD, the School of Population and Public Health. I mean, I have no idea. It still feels a little bit like a dream. I wasn't expecting to be accepted, but that's just another way that I feel at least gets me closer to the cogwork of the great machine and trying to sort of hack away the thickets to be able to bring folks there so that they can speak for themselves through their own work and tell their stories and really demand the things that they need. It's like part of a more transformative approach, I guess, to trying to reimagine or revolutionize this like aspect of radical care, which a lot of times in the journeys, whenever we would have conversations with folks on an international level who would come to look at some of the services in the downtown east side, I would always say we provide a radical form of care here, and it's love.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I often say that punk rock is love. So,
Totally.
and then you started a band. Alien Boys with a lot of songs about mental health and substance use and classism and things like that. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Totally. And I feel very lucky that I've got to maintain this as an outlet for all that I do. So it's like I kind of feel as though I eat, breathe, and live those like tenets of harm reduction and uplifting priority populations as much as I can. It's funny because when Alien Boys started, most of us in the band at the time were also working in harm reduction service provision. So that's been a very important part of who we are. This is kind of part of this other aspect where whenever we go on tour, it doesn't matter where we are. The most beautiful thing to me is when folks come up and feel safe enough to have a conversation with me about some of the lyrics in some of our songs and just say that they felt that there was that relatability and that it gave them a sense of hope or it gave them a sense of being seen. I think that's what we all want, especially if we're in our lower spaces. And so just being able to reach out and touch people in that way, make them feel like they can be empowered and that they are there. Everyone just wants to be heard.
At what point did you begin working in substance use services? And do you remember if there was a click there about doing it, or did you start doing it because it was an opportunity?
That's a good question. I think that for me, it's always been something that was taught to me through being raised in a Catholic school. They tell you a lot of times, though I am not myself a religious person, and certainly a lot of the aspects of those components did not work for me and I don't agree with in an organized religion kind of way. They taught us the values of taking care of those who had less. And really, that was what the church was supposed to be about. And so those value systems were so intrinsically put into me as a youthful person that I really appreciated having that piece. If anything, if I have to look at the silver lining, folks might give a little offering on Sunday, but what are they doing in their everyday lives to uplift? And so that hypocrisy really infuriated me when I was quite young. So as I got older and started to see and experience more things around substance use and mental health and how those two things really tie in together, it just felt like the natural thing to me.
For a lot of people, there's a push and pull with harm reduction and enablement. It's a question that a lot of people struggle with. I'm
Yeah.
wondering your opinion on that.
Harm reduction as enabling is kind of one of those myths because it doesn't matter what you do. People are going to use drugs, period, end of story, full stop. They have since the dawn of time, since human beings found and discovered that there were mind-altering substances that existed. They're used all across the world for different reasons and different incarnations and different formats for different things. And just because you're providing the safe alternatives for people, so from like a public health capacity to reduce the transmission of certain like bloodborne diseases, for example, to keep people safer in that level, that's not creating people using substances. That's just giving them a safe landing pad and hopefully welcoming them into that circle of care. By offering those services, it gives you that contact point with someone else. Could be someone in healthcare, could be someone that's a peer, someone that has the same experience as you. And really, what we need is those doors to be open for people so that a place where they feel safe that they can step into, where conversations can happen whenever they feel like they're ready to have those conversations. When we force people into recovery and treatment, that's not successful. We know that it's been proven, it's well researched. So even though it's like kind of this like feels like this relic of like a temperance movement, you just have to have this punitive, more punishing approach. But one of the lines that's used a lot of times is support, don't punish. When we welcome in, that's creating more space for folks than when we are exclusionary in our practices and push them out.
Is harm reduction punk rock?
Harm reduction is absolutely punk rock. Yeah. As you were saying before, the punk rock community, like at shows all the times, you see people who are in places and positions that where they need that extra care. And that was one of the more powerful things, especially about coming to Vancouver, where there's a lot more going on, a lot more shows happening, a lot more people at them. Everyone takes care of everyone there for the most part. And if you're not part of that culture of care, you're probably not going to be in that space for very long.
That was my conversation with Sarinn Blawatt of Alien Boys, alienboys.bandcamp.com. For more episodes of Screen Therapy, go to screentherapyhq.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. Big news, the Screen Therapy book is available now. Screen Therapy, A Punk Journey Through Mental Health, tells my story and the stories of others who use punk as a catalyst for mental health. Like this podcast, it links the community-minded punk scene with the mental wellness of the punks who belong to it. To order the book, go to screentherapyhq.com. For merch, check out screamtherapy.threadless.com. Okay, enough promoting. It's time for some thanking. Thank you for listening to Screen Therapy. Doing this podcast and talking to folks about punk rock and mental health has been a crucial part of my own mental stability, and it means so much to me that you're out there listening. Screen Therapy is created in the Cathet region of coastal British Columbia, Canada, on the traditional territory of the Tla'amin Nation. Contact me at screentherapyhq.com or email me at screentherapypodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Let's talk about punk rock and mental health. Until next time, take care and be well.